Yo, 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 people and patrons of the night, it is your boy, the Horrorlander. And several months ago, I had the tremendous pleasure to read one of my favorite kids' horror stories of all time. One of my favorite Halloween kids' horror books. I absolutely loved it. It gave me everything I wanted, and it managed to do it within a reasonable page count for the subgenre. That is the book, The Sleepy Hollow Gang by Robert Piatone. Now, this book I was not expecting to love. It was from Weird House Press's kids horror book line, and it's the one that felt the most cliche in terms of its idea, its cover, its premise, so I didn't have high expectations for it. But the book ended up being fantastic. I gave it a 10 out of 10 perfect. It had everything that I was looking for. It had cinematic action sequences, one of the best kids' horror villains to ever be created, which is the Headless Horseman spirit within the book. All the different characters had lots of shine, lots of good dialogue, lots of good dynamics, showed emotional depth and maturity, especially over the next story that I'll be talking about in this video. And overall, it was just a fantastic experience. The Sleepy Hollow Gang, for those of you unaware, is essentially about a new kid who moves into Tarrytown, the Sleepy Hollow part of New York, and they basically end up meeting a group of loser sort of kids, a monster squad kind of group, who end up coming together and spending time on Halloween. And there's an urban legend ritual, Candyman, Bloody Mary equivalent, which allows you to basically resurrect a spirit from a grave using that ritual. And they end up practicing it on the spirit of the Headless Horseman in the graveyard and end up summoning the thing to cause chaos and mayhem throughout the town, cause a lot of problems and a lot of destruction, and it's up to them to stop it. And yeah, man, the book was fantastic. All the different characters that you got introduced to had a lot of just good screen time, a lot of good moments. You had emotional depth and maturity with the characters towards the end of the book, throughout the book, and later on. And the Headless Horseman, man, he is amazing. He rides on this decaying, zombified, flaming horse. He uses pyrokinesis, is able to manipulate fire on some heat blast shit from Ben 10. He had a hellfire sword. He was able to launch jack-o'-lanterns that exploded like fire bombs. And he was able to even, repair himself. Anytime limbs got blown off, he uses pumpkin rinds in a Frankenstein style to, stitch himself back together. All types of wild stuff. But the book was fantastic. Overall, just a cinematic kids horror story, and I fell in love with it. So it's without a doubt that I got intrigued by Robert Piatone. And coincidentally, I ended up picking one of his adult horror books, which is called The Curse of the Cobman. And I noticed that in each of the different horror books that he writes, most of the time they take place in New York and upstate New York. So it started giving me the idea that maybe in the future we could get crossovers. Maybe the Sleepy Hollow Gang goes up against some of these other threats. And then I found out that actually it did happen. Matter of fact, there is a novella, around a 50-page short story, which is in one of his newest short story collections called Tear Me Open, which actually did a crossover. It actually did the Sleepy Hollow Gang versus the Cobman. And coincidentally, I read those two because they piqued my interest, and then I found out that there was a crossover. So that's what I'm going to be talking about in this video, going over the story about it, what happens with the Sleepy Hollow Gang in this one, and how much did I like it. Because yes, I like this one. And spoiler alert, I may have liked it a lot. So let's get into the story. Sleepy Hollow Gang versus the Cobman, the Cobbening, opens up with a recontextualization about one of the climax sequences in The Curse of the Cobman, which is an adult horror book, where essentially the Cobman is getting, ran over and attacked by the main characters. They're fighting it. And what ended up happening was that as the Cobman figured that it was basically at the end of its life, it might have been in danger, it might have been damaged, it ends up doing a mechanism function where it releases one of its corn kernel seeds into the farmland. And you then find out that as the Cobman ended up getting defeated in that book, that corn kernel seed in the farmland started to germinate, absorb nutrients, water, sunlight, photosynthesis and start growing. And essentially, the Cobman is able to reincarnate with a new form, a new Cobman, the son of the Cobman, which evolutionary mechanism, it retains the memories and the instinctual ideas of its predecessor, and this essentially allows it to keep, respawning and regenerating after destruction. Of course, I don't know if it's going to come back. Hopefully not. It's a creepy, crazy bastard that should probably stay down in the ground. But yeah, in this case, it came back. And as it came back, it's looking for blood, it's looking for violence and carnage. So it starts heading its way while the blood red harvest moon is out over to Tarrytown, Sleepy Hollow, where eventually it's going to run into our cast of characters. Following up 1 year later after the events of Sleepy Hollow Gang's book, you have all the group of characters, the Monster Squad, the Sleepy Hollow Gang, and you find out that they've been continuing on the sidelines their adventures on cryptid research, exploring different places, different types of hauntings, but they've effectively become local celebrities. I mean, they are famous now. Some of them don't want to be, but everybody recognizes them. They have fan bases, they have fan clubs. They explain that when they're taking a test in math class, one of the extra credit questions was, something involving the Sleepy Hollow Gang incident that happened last Halloween. They got audition tapes being sent to them. So the main character, Derek, who is the protagonist of the first book, he's dealing with a lot of kind of grief and hollow feelings, sort of depression inside of him, because, of course, during the events of the Sleepy Hollow Gang book, there were people who died. There were teenagers and policemen and people who ended up dying and losing their lives during the event. It was traumatic. It was a lot of high tension action. People didn't make it out, and that causes a lot of grievance and grief within the main characters. They have to get to counseling. They have to kind of deal with that. And the fact that everyone's glorifying it and putting him in the spotlight, his other friends like Herman and the Brainiac and, Zoe, who's the tough girl in the group, the older girl, they're all sort of kind of going along with it and just dealing with it as a part of life. But Derek is kind of feeling, left out. And something happened towards the end of that book that's leaving him sort of emotionally depressed because he might have lost somebody and had something happen to someone important. But with that, there is going to be this brand new attraction that's, always coming out every single year between Halloween and Christmas, which is a winter carnival. And in this carnival, you have all types of rides and attraction and food and gimmicks that are centered around combining Christmas and Halloween together. So you got hot chocolate, you got the snow, you got Santa Claus, you got all this crazy, stuff, but at the same time, you got, horror attractions. There's a place called the Dark Dungeon, which is almost like a Shocker on Shock Street kind of ride with those type of attractions. So they're excited for that. They want to go there. Obviously, word catches wind that they're heading over there and they're dealing with people getting hyped up and giving them warm greetings. But little do they know that the Cobman may have ended up getting to the carnival before them. And when you have one of the ride operators who's inside of the dark dungeon, basically setting up the animatronics, making sure everything is working while, some visitors are coming through and experiencing the ride, she ends up seeing this hulking figure covered up by the fog machine in deep fog. And she hears sounds of like hundreds of cicadas and crickets chirping out loud, which is the sound of the Cobman. And eventually she ends up getting attacked. This thing has its razor sharp, corn silk strands, basically grab her by the feet and hang her upside down. And then it starts tightening and she falls to the ground, except she doesn't know why she fell to the ground and why she feels warm and wet, and that's because her feet have been severed off. She's bleeding to death, and this thing is basically drinking up her blood, ripping her apart, cutting her gut open, squeezing her like a juicer. And meanwhile, people are going by and thinking that this is just a morbid attraction featured in the ride. So it's quite messed up. It's some dark humor there. And it is bloody, so, this is not exactly a kid's horror story. It's more so YA, which kind of makes sense because this is a hybrid of adult horror book and a kid's horror story, so it aligns. But then as the main cast of the Sleepy Hollow Gang and some fans and a new guy ends up meeting up with them and going through the different rides, they may end up catching wind and finding out that there might be some otherworldly entity that's around. But before they realize that, Derek, feeling depressed and feeling upset, leaves the carnival early and gets back home because he doesn't feel like he has a sense of purpose. He just feels like he's been empty ever since the events of what happened. But you get a revelation, which is that after the events of the Sleepy Hollow Gang book, he still kept the sword of the horseman, its Hellfire sword, as like a souvenir. The mayor let him keep it, and he keeps it in his house. And because that sword is around, he keeps getting haunted by the apparition of the Headless Horseman. But it's not malevolent. It's not causing him problem or causing trouble. Instead, it's just like a wraith, a familiar that keeps following him, periodically appearing in the corners of wherever he is. And that's what's kind of taking a toll on him. And when he gets home, he sees that underneath his bed is glowing bright orange, and there may be steam and smoke and hellfire that's coming out from the sword. And then he sees the Headless Horseman, who doesn't speak ever, but now it's gesturing him to basically come towards him and kind of hints that it wants to lead him somewhere. And you find out that at the Winter Carnival, the Cobman is now in full effect. It is tearing apart people. It's decapitating adults. It's ripping legs off of teenagers. The Sleepy Hollow Gang, other members are getting makeshift spears and fighting it and trying to use, local equipment and gadgets and stuff to fight it. Meanwhile, it's just wreaking havoc, tearing apart attractions, killing people. And as they get there, the police end up getting there, trying to get into a shootout, and it becomes a big scene. And eventually they hear something. They hear the sound of these thundering hooves, which are heading towards the carnival. And then they end up seeing an incredible sight, which put a giant smile on my face, which is the fact that Derek is actually riding on that decaying, zombified, burning horse of the Headless Horseman. The Headless Horseman is riding on top of it, and in front of him, straddled, is the main character, and he's wielding that Hellfire sword, and the horse starts kicking and attacking the Cobman. The Headless Horseman's using pyrokinesis, firing out, streams of fire and exploding fireballs at the Cobman to burn it down. Meanwhile, Derek is wielding that sword, and it's very Wild Western, very medieval kind of hybrid action going on. And meanwhile, the rest of the people are trying to take down the Cobman. And things unfold, stuff happens, and there may be a very selfless act that is done by one of the characters. And it ends up actually being quite an emotionally heavy moment because the main character may realize by some spirits that he has more to live for. He has a lot of people who are relying on him. He has a lot of people who look up to him, and he should keep on living and trying to live his life to the fullest and not be focused on all the negative aspects of what happened that night during the Sleepy Hollow moment, but actually focus on the future. And that's effectively where the story ends, with a rather lighthearted joke about what's going to happen next time with the Winter Carnival and its remodeling. So that is the Sleepy Hollow Gang versus the Cobman, the Cobbening. I give this one a 9 out of 10 grade. I love the fact that we got a crossover. Again, all of Robert Piatone's books, horror books specifically, take place in New York. I know he has one called Nocturnal Creatures, which I think deals with Sasquatches and Bigfoot up in upstate New York. He's got a new book that's going to be coming out in 2026 in October called Amityville Awakens, where the Amityville house gets torn down. Spirits and paranormal are let loose on the town, and I think it takes place on Long Island. So there's potential for the future for the Sleepy Hollow Gang to keep coming back and having these crossovers. But the fact that we got a crossover is really cool. The Cobman is a really freaky, fun, crazy villain, which is, quite gory and bloody and has freaky abilities and freaky traits, while at the same time being absolutely ridiculous. I love the fact that we get to explore the Sleepy Hollow Gang more. The fact that you get that emotional maturity with them because, in the first book, they dealt with the whole situation of what happened on Halloween night. Towards the end, they had to go get counseling and they had to deal with the grief of all the people who were lost during that night. And then they sort of set up this monster squad, the troop kind of thing, where they're going to be hunting monsters and spirits in the future. And then now you get this story where they're effectively become local celebrities. So now they have to deal with being celebrities. I like the fact that that theme is very much present because you usually don't get that in kids' horror. Most of the time, crazy stuff happens and nobody knows about it or people forget. But no, in this one, you actually get the idea that after some crazy stuff happens, the kids actually have to deal with stardom and fame and how to deal with that. Even if they feel like they're normal and they don't deserve it, they pretty much have to deal with the idea of always being in the public eye and even scrutiny, because reporters come to their house and there are kids who don't like them and blame them for what happened, in addition to people who want to be there for clout and fame alongside them. So all types of good messages and good themes, emotional maturity, the fact that there's a selfless act made by one of the characters, and you get that emotional moment where he realizes that there's more to life. You know, he has to keep living, he has to keep doing what he has to do, even if he may not want to, but it's his destiny. I love the scenes involving the action sequences with the Cobb Man. The winter Halloween carnival mix is a fun setting. It's a really novel idea, and I like it. And that climax scene of just him riding, Wild Western plus medieval with a Hellfire sword, the Headless Horseman, who he fought, where all these guys fought in the previous book, is now on their side. He's able to summon them because he has the sword and actually use its powers to defeat another bigger threat that's at stake. It's all very cool. It's all very badass. And again, a very cinematic story. So it gets a 9 out of 10 great. The first book I gave a 10 out of 10 perfect. I 100% suggest that you guys go out there and you go pick up the Sleepy Hollow Gang and then pick up Tear Me Open, the short story collection, especially to read this novella. You can get the Sleepy Hollow Gang on Barnes & Noble's website. That's where I bought my copy. There's also copies on Weird House Press that you can buy. And for Tear Me Open, you could get a physical copy on Amazon, or you could get the Kindle edition. Save some money if you want electronic. And I suggest that you read Sleepy Hollow and then you read this right after, because it is some of the best characters that you can invest yourself within. It's a very cliche idea, but the execution is fantastic. And that was one of the best Halloween stories. Here you got some fun creature feature monster action. And I will always look forward in case in the future we have any more appearances of the Sleepy Hollow Gang. And that's all I got for today. So if you enjoyed this video, hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, comment down below. I have more content that's going to be coming out relatively soon. And with the new House of Shivers Goosebumps book being announced, that it is another living dummy book, I can't say that I'm necessarily on the full roller coaster for the Goosebumps ride as of right now, so I'm always going to be on the lookout for new kids horror stuff or other content. So any kids horror authors out there who may not be as popular as Arlstein, you throw your hat into the ring, keep doing what you do. I will try to hunt it down, read them, and review them. And for any adult horror authors out there who, want to get on the kids horror debut train, feel free to hop on, because I've seen some fantastic fiction and fantastic stuff with what you guys have been doing, and I'm really happy with it. I'm really proud of it, and I'll keep promoting it for as long as it's around, and it's good. And in my honest opinion, a lot of the stuff that's been coming out has been keeping me excited and keeping me rejuvenated with the subgenre. So yeah, enjoy the rest of your day, everybody. I'm out of here. Deuces.